Welcome to Help. I have a picky eater. My name is Melissa Czinski, and I am an OT at Building Bridges Therapy Center.
My name is Liz Engelsen. I am also an OT at Building Bridges Therapy Center, and we are both trained and certified providers of the sequential oral sensory approach to feeding by Dr. Kay Toomey.
So some objectives that everyone will walk away with today once we're finished. So first, we would like to identify who's in the audience and what the learning needs will be. So we'll have questions open throughout the presentation, and we'll have them all written down, and we will answer all of your questions at the end. We'll summarize oral, motor, sensory, and other miscellaneous factors that affect feeding and eating for all of the ages. And we will provide strategies that include sensory preparation, food chaining, managing food jags, family meals and modeling, food play, and food science. Okay, so first we're going to get into the difference between picky eaters versus problem feeders. This is something that I get a lot of parents coming to me and saying, I have a child that is just such a picky eater. And that picky eater, label is used so often, and oftentimes they'll tell me, yeah, my kid only eats like 5 different foods, and I'll say, oh, we're not quite in that picky eater range. So picky eaters have a decreased range, but will eat at least about 30 different foods. They can have foods lost to food jags, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but they'll usually regain them within about 2 weeks or so after taking a break from that food. They're able to tolerate new foods on their plate. They're not going to push away from the table as much. They're not going to become really upset if something new is on their plate or around them. They'll eat at least one food from most food textures or nutrition groups. So we've got most nutrition groups are going to be incorporated in your picky eater range. They will frequently eat a different meal than the rest of the family, but they'll still participate in some of the family meals. And then they're sometimes referred to as a picky eater by parents at well visit checkups with the pediatrician. So just to get into a really quick case study. So I currently work with a little guy, a 6-year-old male who came to me probably about 1.5 years ago. Parents said he was a picky eater, definitely a picky eater. So has more than 30 foods in his range. However, most of the foods that he has are in the brown category of foods, which we see a ton. So most of the foods that he eats are the color brown. He's got a few little ones, dispersed in there that are not brown, but most are brown and most are very similar to each other. So he's got 3 protein sources. So we've got chicken, we've got eggs, and we've got yogurt. That's where we end. And with those, we'll see often that that chicken needs to be a specific kind. So if we eat chicken nuggets, it's a pretty specific brand. We don't eat many brands. Or if it's chicken breast, it's only rotisserie chicken, things like that. If it's eggs, we usually only eat one kind of egg. So scrambled or a fried egg or a hard-boiled egg. We don't see a ton of, interspersing those. And then he's got 5 fruits. So he has berries, all the different berries. However, again, we've got those specifics in there. So if it's blueberries, they have to be big, rounded blueberries. If it's strawberries, we have to make sure that they're sweet. And if it's apples, they have to be sliced. So we've got some preferences in there. And then he's got 1 vegetable, which is corn, which is a pretty popular one. That's our sweetest vegetable. That's the one that we see the most often. That one and carrots, we usually see a ton. And then the rest is just all carbs. So we've got all of our cereals and crackers and, cookies, all of those types of things. But again, most of them are those brownish, orangish, whitish foods. So he's got his large range, but he's also got his preferences. And his largest range is in those crunchy, processed, mostly sweetish, salty foods. So that's my case study with my picky eater.
And then on the other side of that, we have our problem feeders. So you'll see a lot of these kind of match up with the other side, picky eaters. So for our problem feeders, these kiddos have severely restricted ranges. So they usually eat less than 20 different foods. And usually there's not much variety between food groups there as well. Foods that are lost due to food jags, which we will talk about later in the presentation, they're usually not regained. So we are eating the same food all the time, we lose that, and then, you know, we might take a 2-week break and that kiddo is not able to come back to that food. These kiddos cry or fall apart when a new food is presented to them. So you'll see like that picture above, we're not just having a behavioral meltdown, we are truly experiencing a stress response. They typically refuse entire categories of food textures or nutrition groups. For example, you know, they won't eat anything that's pureed, or no fruits or vegetables, those kinds of things. These kids always eat different meals than the rest of their family, and they usually don't participate in family meals. These kiddos will often do what we call graze. They'll just graze throughout the day. They'll eat you know, little bits at different times throughout the day. They usually won't sit at the table with their family. They're usually pretty stressed out when it comes to family meals, and so they would rather just kind of be away from the table. And then these kids are persistently referred to as picky eaters across several well visit checkups. We hear a lot of times from these parents that every year they hear from their doctors, oh, it's a phase, they'll grow out of it. And then the next year comes and they haven't grown out of it. So a quick case study for a problem feeder that I currently work with and have worked with for a while now. Our range upon starting therapy was 8 foods. We had 8 foods and 3 different drinks. So we had plain rotini noodles, pot stickers, but whether he would eat the stuff inside the pot stickers kind of fluctuated based on the time of day. Teddy Grahams, goldfish, one type of bread that was from a bakery, cheese bread, pizza, blueberry Activia yogurt, juice, milk, and water. So that was all we had. We did lose a lot of foods due to JAGs. So bananas and apples specifically, those were the 2 big ones because those were the only fruits that he was eating. And then we lost those and we were not able to gain them back. I will give a little bit of a progress update when we talk about things throughout the presentation as well. He always eats different meals than his family. And again, he is a grazer. So he is typically coming to the table, grabbing a couple bites of something, and then running back. And usually this is during his play or during his kind of time alone with himself. And then he's definitely been persistently referred to as a picky eater across multiple years. He actually drank from a bottle until the age of 5. So some factors affecting feeding that we're going to get into. These are just some of them. There are always more. I feel like every year that we are in practice, we're learning new things and more things that affect feeding. But now that we know the difference between our picky eaters and our problem feeders, we're going to kind of get into some of those factors that affect feeding because we need to know these things in order to know how to best help our kiddos.
So oral motor skills. These are the things that we've all heard about. So we know about tongue movements and cheek movements and, you know, jaw when we're chewing and lips and throat and swallowing and all of those good things. But I will say that these are the children that tend to fall through the cracks. So these are the ones that will come to us and usually on their welcome packet or their intake packet, it will say, they had a really difficult time with breastfeeding, or they never really took to the bottle. So that kind of cues us really quickly that there might be something oral motor going on, that maybe something's not moving properly, that maybe we didn't develop enough strength when we really needed to be able to progress onto the different foods that they, you know, move through as they're getting older. So just as a quick note, I actually had an evaluation this past week with an 11-month-old baby and came in, mom said, you know, difficulty breastfeeding. We switched to the bottle right away and he took to that much better. So we just stuck with that and ran with it. So now when I'm watching him eat his purees, I'm noticing we've got an open mouth posture. So maybe we've got some jaw strength that might not have fully developed. We're getting more tongue protrusion. So we don't necessarily have the type of tongue movements that we need to be able to have to move that food around in our mouth. That tongue does so much work to be able to make kind of a wave pattern and get the food back to the back of the throat so that we can swallow. And if that's not happening, then we often see kids compensating. They're using their cheeks to move things around. They might be using their fingers to move things to the side of their mouth to get them to their teeth. That's a big thing. So we need to use those movements in order to eat, the appropriate foods for the age that we are. So again, back to my baby. So he had no munching pattern. So no going up and down jaw movements. I was seeing nothing when we put food in the mouth. Cheeks weren't working. We weren't seeing, their normal. So that's what we want to be seeing. Even from babies, when they're trying to move that food around, we need to be seeing that mouth moving and working to get that food moved around to make what we call a bolus, which is that, big piece of food that's kind of all mashed up in our mouth before we get it back to the throat. So the tongue and the gums and the teeth, if we have them as we get a little bit older, and the cheeks, they all work together to make that bolus so that we can appropriately swallow. When that doesn't happen, that's when we start to get some fear. We start to get anxiety. We start to get to the point to where it's just not fun to eat anymore. So that's where oral motor skills can kick in from a very young age and then cause problems later on down the road. Okay, so then we will start to talk about a little bit of sensory processing too. So you'll see throughout the presentation that we're going to go through everything that's really going to add up to why kids are afraid to eat, why they stopped eating, why they don't have fun eating, why they're refusing. So the next thing that we'll talk about is sensory processing. So sensory is one of those things that many people know about our normal systems of, vision, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Those are our 5 senses that everybody knows about. And then when people come into OT, we start talking about these different senses, and a lot of parents go, wait a second, I had no idea that there were anything else that we had to deal with. So we do also have our vestibular system, which is our movement system. Our proprioceptive system, which is where we are in space. So our joints getting feedback from our environment, being able to tell us that, our arm is touching something right now, or we're getting really close to a wall, we need to move away because we're going to bump into it. And then lastly, interoception, which is our sense of what's going on in our body. So that's all of our normal hunger and thirst, bowel and bladder, temperature, pain, emotion, and then Liz is going to talk a little bit more in depth about these in the next slide as well.
So we have all of these sensory systems. We constantly have information coming in from the environment through all of these different, we'll call them pathways. So I do have the textbook definition here. When we talk about sensory integration, we're referring to an innate neurobiological process that refers to the way we receive information from our senses. We have to organize that information, and then we use that to participate in our daily activities. So we as OTs, we call those our occupations. So bear with me here with my analogy. We're gonna think of this like a roadmap. So we have our brain, this is our common destination. We have our visual system, our auditory system, our olfactory system, our gustatory system, tactile. We have our vestibular system, our proprioceptive system, and our interoceptive system. So all of these systems, let's think of them like highways. So we have these 2-way highways, they go straight to the brain. They're taking the information that we are receiving from our environment and relaying that information to the brain. Once that information gets to our brain, we're able to process through it, organize it, and then the brain sends a response back down through the other side of that highway and tells the body how to respond. So when we're constantly doing this in our environment, none of these things are happening one at a time, right? We're not just, experiencing something visually. We're not just experiencing a sound. most often we're experiencing information coming in from all of these different highways, and we have all of this movement coming in and out throughout the body. So how does this affect feeding? Why is this important? So when we have our sensory systems involved in the feeding and eating process, we're using every single one of them at the same time. Eating is actually one of the only human occupations that involves every single sensory system, pretty much very, very significantly. So we're experiencing constant input from all of our different senses, and we need our sensory systems to be functioning adequately in order to be able to tolerate that feeding and eating process. So we need to be able to know what's going on. So when our sensory systems are not functioning adequately, we refer to that as dysregulation. The problem with dysregulation as it refers to, or as it relates to feeding and eating, is that it can actually trigger your fight or flight response or your stress response. So our sensory systems are not functioning together the right way. We're now dysregulated. Now my fight or flight system is triggered. What happens then is that our appetite turns off. So we know that our fight or flight system is designed to protect us. So we are turning off the appetite, we're turning off bowel and bladder, we're turning off all of those things that are not important, because all our body is caring about is getting out of that stimulus, getting away from what is making us scared. So now we kind of have, you know, two things going on. Not only are we dysregulated, our sensory systems are not working together the right way, we also aren't hungry anymore if we were to start. So we definitely need optimal sensory processing for the feeding and eating process. So going off of that, if we return to our roadmap analogy, we can think of optimal sensory processing, sensory integration as these highways up above. So those are nice, smooth pathways. All of our sensory systems are working nicely. We're able to transfer all of that information, what the food looks like, what the food sounds like, how it feels in our hands, how it feels in our mouths, what's going on with our body, what's going on in the environment. All of those pathways are sending nice, smooth information to the brain, and we're able to respond to that pretty well. If our sensory systems are not functioning the right way, or they're not functioning at optimal levels, we can think of that like this picture down below. So if we have these bumpy roads, we're not going to be able to send the correct information to the brain and be able to respond to it in an adaptive way.
So then we'll talk really quickly about those miscellaneous factors. So the factors that don't necessarily fit into, you know, any of the other big categories, but are just as important to a fun, positive experience while we're eating. So we have to talk about postural strength and stability. I'll talk a little bit more about my little baby that I saw the other day. You know, we put him into a high chair and he immediately kind of slumped in. So we see some, you know, weakness there, or just really not wanting to be in that chair, because we know what the chair means, and we know that it's going to mean that food is coming at me and I'm scared of it. So we have to think about seating when we are thinking about our kiddos that are not loving to eat right now. So we talk about the 90-90-90 seating position. So we want our hips at 90 degrees, our arms and elbows at 90 degrees, and then our knees at 90 degrees. And it's so super important. This is my number one thing when I have parents come in, even at the evaluation, I'm asking about, where does your child eat? Do their feet touch the floor? And I will say 95% of the time they're sitting at my kitchen table, and nope, they're either sitting on their legs, up on their knees, or their feet are dangling off the floor. So really quickly, while I'm going through this, I want everybody that's listening to, if you're sitting in a chair at a desk or wherever you might be, to lift your feet up off the floor. And while I finish the rest of this slide, keep your feet above the floor, off the floor, just kind of dangling, and see how hard it is to kind of just sit there and take in information, because it's actually really tough. That's what we're asking these kids to do while they're eating. So now when I don't have that strength and stability, and I'm not feeling great about eating, and now you're asking me to eat something that I don't want to eat, let's just kind of get that in our mind to think about why this is not going to happen today. So then next would be our hand-to-mouth coordination with finger foods, and then using utensils. do these children have the fine motor skills, the fine motor coordination, the upper limb coordination to actually scoop something off of their plate and bring it to their mouth without spilling it all over their clothes? Are they able to pick up the food with their fingers? Do they have the pincer grasp or the tripod grasp that they need to hold on to those foods steady enough to get them to their mouth? And then we talk about environmental factors. So of course, in today's day and age, we've got screens all over the place. So it's not a detrimental thing. It's something that we necessarily would like to see kind of away from the dinner table, but it's something that we would work slowly to get away from the table. We would never take screens away immediately because a lot of kids need some kind of something going on if they've already had it. So we would work, we would want you to work with your OT to figure out what's the best way that I can kind of take those distractions away and make that food and that meal and that family time the center of what's going on instead of a screen. Again, so then going into who's eating at the meal, we all need to sit down as a family. So that's going to be a big recommendation from us too, because eating and having a meal is such a social thing. We are the first ones that teach those kiddos how to eat. So we'll often tell parents, even for older kiddos, they still need that demonstration of, this is how I'm chewing my food. I'm going to do these big, over exaggerated motions just to show them how, it's best to take in food. So then we've got the setup of the room, the table. Are there a ton of distractions around us? Are there lots of visual stimulation? What's going on? Is the dog barking? Do they want to go outside? It's just a million things. And then of course our plates, cups, and utensils used. I will say for this one, we've got so many kiddos that come in and parents will tell us, we use 1 cup, 1 spoon, 1 fork, and they've got about 2 plates that they really like, and they'll only eat off of those. So again, all of these factors contributing to, if I change those things up, now my kid doesn't want anything at all. And even if I do use those and I think it's their favorite, if I'm putting the food on them and they don't like it, we'll see. So then we've got medical needs. So do we have swallowing difficulties? Do we have liquids that need to be thickened? Are we on a special diet? Are we on a special seizure diet? Are we on, something that, some kind of a diet that these kiddos have to be eating foods that they necessarily don't really like? So how do we start to include those into their diet in a fun, positive way? Emotional factors, stress and trauma. I feel like this is the biggest underlying thing that I see in my practice. Give me a kid any day that's got some oromotor difficulties that we can work on and start to add those different foods. But once we add that anxiety factor in, once we add fear in, that's a whole different ball game. That is something that is so, so difficult to work through, because then we're dealing with, emotions as a whole, and dealing with, a 5-year-old and trying to help them learn that, okay, this is just a feeling. This is not our overall being. We can still take in food and it doesn't have to be a scary experience. So that's a really big one too. And then of course, nutritional needs. Lots of kids with allergies now, lots of peanuts, things, peanuts that are in things that they didn't know, and then they're having an allergic reaction to. And again, that ups that fear and anxiety for any kinds of foods, because, hey, I ate this one food and I thought it was safe, but then I had a really bad allergic reaction. So is that going to happen every single time I eat a new food? So we have a lot of things going on when it comes to feeding and eating. All right, so a quick photo analysis. You've got a cute little guy here. So we want to talk really quickly just about what's going on in this photo. So let's talk about it in terms of baby's motor development and baby's sensory systems. So we just learned a ton about our positioning and seating. So the first thing that we can probably see is that this baby's feet are on nothing. They're just dangling. This is one of our common baby seats that kind of puts them into a little bit of a slumped posture, puts those hips kind of out and about, and then feet are not touching anything. So we definitely want to talk about that. Baby starting to kind of arch away from the food. kind of scared of the food. We see that they're not really loving it. So again, once that fear kicks in, our hunger starts to turn off. So we're gonna start spitting things out, and then we get the parents to come in and say, "Oh, baby's spitting all of our foods that we've just tried. What do I do now?" So that's what we've got going on with our little guy here.
And then here we have an older boy. So we do have some of this photo cut off, but it does look like, just based off of where his elbow is sitting, it looks to me like that table's probably a little bit too high. If that table's too high, that probably means his chair is too high as well. I'm going to go ahead and say that this mom probably did not put anything underneath his feet. So let's assume that he has feet dangling as well. Another thing that's important to note is that children over the age of 1 should be feeding themselves. So this kiddo looks maybe about 3, 4, maybe a little bit older than that, but it looks like mom is trying to spoon feed him, and we should be allowing him to have that independence as long as he is able to do that successfully. What I really see hugely here is what's going on in his environment. So the first thing that I see is he's plugging his nose. So maybe this kiddo has some aversions that have to do with the smell of foods. This food might be something that, like Melissa was saying, he had a previous reaction to. Maybe this was something he ate when he was sick. Maybe he had experienced vomiting after eating this food, and now just the smell of it is making him have that aversion. Maybe this food is something that he's never tried before. The smell might be really strong. Maybe he's not a fan of how it's smelling, and now mom is coming towards me and I don't have any control over what she's doing. She's about to put that in my mouth. If I'm a kid, of course I'm going to cover my mouth and nose because I don't want that anywhere near me. The other big thing that stands out to me here is the caregiver's face. So this mom, she looks pretty stressed out. And, if any of you guys are here today because you experience feeding difficulties with your children at home, I'm sure that you can relate to this. Feeding can be so incredibly stressful for not only the child, but also the caregiver. So that's important for us to mention as well. Unfortunately, our kids feed off of us and what we're giving them. So we really need to be able to reframe our relationship with the person that we're eating with, or people that we're eating with, if we're talking about families. And we need to have trust. We need to have a trusting relationship between the person who's providing our food to us and the person who's eating the food. If mom has tricked me by hiding peas in my mac and cheese that I love so much, and that made me gag, I'm not going to trust mom anymore. So when mom's coming at me, if this is mac and cheese, I'm not quite sure what it is. If mom is coming at me with this, I have no way of knowing if she's trying to trick me. I don't trust her anymore. So now I've turned my appetite off. I'm scared. I'm anxious. I don't want to eat that. The other thing that I see going on here, and I know that this is something that's so hard to manage, especially when you have multiple children or a busy household, which I know most of us do, especially now that people are home more often. It looks like there's a lot of environmental distractions back there. We have lots of things on the counter. Our kids, especially if they do struggle with other things like attention and focus, our kiddos are going to focus on everything else that's going on around them when our focus should be on that food. So those are just a couple of things here that we know are going on with this boy.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about some strategies for the home, and just kind of doubling back on what Liz was saying about the fear that comes into kids. I think we also don't talk enough about the anxiety that we see that happens with parents as well, because the parents are equally as important to this feeding journey with these kiddos. And I know sometimes when I bring up the subject about trust with parents and kids, parents get very, like, oh, my kid doesn't doesn't trust me anymore. And it's something that's so different, and it's so innate in children when it starts to come to food with trust. And it's not necessarily that your kid doesn't trust everything that you're doing. It's just that feeding portion. And that's going back to the baby that I was talking about in the picture previous to Liz. That's kind of where it starts. If we have, like Liz was saying, the vomiting and the gagging and the choking, even from very early on, it often gets said that it's reflux and this is what's going on, and we'll take medication and we'll be good to go. And that is often not the case. I have a lot of children on my caseload that are 4, 5, 6 and up that had reflux as a baby, and the feeling of eating never really got much better. So then we're still in that area where it's a gray area. So yeah, so we'll go into the strategies for the home. Okay, so sensory preparation before we're eating. So our goal here is to achieve total body organization and regulation prior to the meal. So this is something that we can add in for 10 to 15 minutes before we start a meal, just doing some simple exercises, basically warming up. So think of this like the meal would be our exercise routine. And before we start an exercise routine, we're going to stretch. We're going to make sure that we're ready, that our body is ready to start doing the exercise. This is basically our stretching before the meal starts. So we want to activate the proprioceptive system. So we want to give those kiddos some heavy work to do. So heavy work is something like those pushing, pulling, crashing, lifting activities. I often tell parents, just get your laundry basket and throw cans of food in there, or throw, your big Tide container, and have this obstacle course of your kid pushing your laundry basket around the house to get ready for dinner, or, pushing what we're going to have for our meal in our laundry basket to the table and around the table and things like that. That's enough of that heavy work that gets those muscles going and gets us ready to eat. Chores, of course, setting the table, doing all of that good stuff before a meal for our older kiddos often, will get us ready for the meal as well. Doing animal walks, wheelbarrow walks, stomping. We can do climbing activities, jumping activities. We can do yoga. For our little guys, for our babies, we can do some crawling. We can do some rocking over a therapy ball, which takes us into the vestibular system. So slow linear swinging, slow rotary swinging. So kind of in a circle swinging. So again, notice we're saying slow. So if we start to get into those really fast movements, and if a kiddo wants to get into their rocking chair and they want to go super, super fast, that's going to really ramp us up. That's going to get our system disorganized. So we want to make sure that we're with our kids and making sure that we know what they're doing and assisting them in that. So we keep everything kind of very low, so we can keep everything, on an even playing field, so that we're not amping up our sensory system, but we're kind of getting it to where it needs to be. We're organizing that body. We can roll over the exercise ball. This is a good one for babies. Invert that head for downward dog. So getting the semicircular canals of the ear upside down, getting that balance system going a little bit more. And then peanut rock. So over a peanut ball. So a ball that looks like our normal peanut that has a little space for their belly to go in. So we can roll over that. And then our tactile system. So we do our deep pressure, we do our bear hugs, sandwich, burrito. This is a good one that goes along with a Mexican themed night. Oop, we got to make some burritos first, and we throw ourselves in the blanket and we roll ourselves up. And now we're ready to go eat our burritos at the table. So that type of thing. Including whatever you're eating in what you're doing with your kid makes the food so much more fun. And then you can talk about it at the mealtime too. So that's a really good way to put this, in before you start eating. Weighted materials, so weighted blankets, heavy comforters. I always tell people, parents will ask me all the time, do I need to go buy a weighted blanket? Absolutely not. You do not need to buy a weighted blanket. You absolutely can. They're wonderful. But if you have a heavy comforter, lounger that's like 5 to 10% of your child's body weight that's giving them some deep pressure, that'll work too. Couch cushions, those will also work. Those will give that same type of input. And then tactile play, I can't stress this one enough. This can be done and should be done all throughout the day at different times. And this is where we're playing in the sand, playing in the dirt, playing with water, the things that kids, should be outside doing, or bring it inside during the winter time. Make putty, make slime, make Play-Doh, do sensory bins, throw your extra dried rice and beans into a bin and throw some, feeding utensils in there. And that's a great way if we're not, and I saw a quick question about using utensils. Using a sensory bin is a really great way to work on using a fork, using a spoon, to just do it outside of that mealtime and work on those skills. Because if we throw some dried rice and dried beans into a bin and we're having them scoop and put it into a container, that's going to work just as well. That's going to get us going in a really sensory positive way.
These things too, I can't stress this part enough. I feel like we all hear from parents so many times, I can't do all these things. I don't have time. It's too much. You're asking too much of me. We get it. As long as you can find something that works for you, that you can make a routine, that's great. So I always try to stress too with parents, do chores, have your kids do chores. It is helpful. So even if this means unloading the dishwasher, we're getting some heavy work, we're putting the dishes away, we're getting that prepped so that when we're done with our meal, it's ready to load back up. We're setting the table, we're involving our kids in part of our meal process. So it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't have to have a bunch of materials. You don't have to go, add all of these things to your Amazon cart. It can be simple. It can be done with your body. We are constantly seen at our center having kids stomping and skipping and jumping and leapfrogging and wheelbarrow walking to the kitchen, back from the kitchen. So include it where you can, but don't stress out about, having the things or making it so fancy. It's fun when you can do that, but it's not required.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of my biggest questions that I often get from a lot of parents too about, how can I do exercises so that I can prepare their sensory system, or so that I can increase core strength. And parents tend to look at me with a really puzzled look sometimes when I say, when we're going from the living room to the dinner table, let's just have them crawl there. And they're like, well, that's just too easy. And I always tell them it's not though. Like it's something that they wouldn't normally be doing, and it gets our body ready in ways that we wouldn't normally do. So it's something different, and it's something super easy. So yeah, like Liz said, such a great point that she made. Make it easy on yourself and do it when you can. So don't stress yourself out more, so that by the time that we all get to the dinner table that we're like, okay, our body's ready, but we're really stressed out. So let's not do that. Make it easy on yourself. And we're always here to help. So definitely reach out to your OT, reach out to us, whomever, we're here to help. All right, so I know we had a question earlier about managing food jags, or what are food jags. So food jag, not a super common term unless you've been to a feeding therapist. So this is when a child just gets burnt out on a food. So this is going to happen with both picky eaters and problem feeders. I feel like we tend to see it more so and more often with our problem feeders because they do have such a low number of foods in their food diet or in their food range. But it is definitely something where my child is eating chicken nuggets every single day. That is their main source of protein. And oh my goodness, they won't accept chicken nuggets anymore. What do I do? They don't have any other proteins. What am I going to do? So this is why we're going to talk about managing food jags, because it is definitely very hard to get a food back once we've food jagged. Now, like we said before, with our picky eaters, within like 2 weeks, we take a break from that food. A lot of times we'll bring it back. We kind of change it up a little bit. With our problem feeders, we can definitely get it back. It's a lot harder. And sometimes we do lose them for a very long period of time. But so we want to talk about that proactive step. We need to manage those food jags. How do we not get this to happen? So how we don't get this to happen is we decrease the frequency that we're presenting the food. So a lot of times, you know, parents, again, will say, it's their only protein, it's their only vegetable, I have to give it to them every day. We don't. So we'll spread that out as much as we can. So if we had chicken nuggets on Monday, maybe we don't have chicken nuggets again until Thursday, and we eat all of our other foods. We make sure that we're getting our calories. We really try to get those nutrition groups in as much as possible. We supplement with the other foods that we have, but we got to kind of give it a little bit of space, a little bit of time before we give that food again. Another way is we can change the way that we present it. So this is something that needs to be done slowly, for sure. Some kids are more accepting than others. And I'll talk about a little, example of one of my kiddos with this. So changing the way that we present it, changing the color. So I have a kiddo that likes eggs. Mom will put food coloring in their eggs and change the color of the eggs for the day of the week. And she'll change that up. And it's, oh, what color is my eggs going to be today? That type of thing. Or using cookie cutters. I will tell parents all the time, invest in a really, cheap, but a large set of cookie cutters so that you can do all kinds of different shapes. Differ the amounts, or change up the way that you're preparing that food, put a little bit of extra pepper on it today, or you might put some paprika on it if they're accepting of that. And what tends to happen, and this is the example that I was going to give, was I had a kiddo the other day that I see via teletherapy, and chicken nuggets are his favorite food. And he really was getting into cutting all of his foods up, and he wanted to figure out what was on the inside of his chicken nuggets that day. And he cut his chicken nugget open and saw that it was not brown on the inside, just like the outside, and was very, very shocked and very upset. And for the day, we were done with chicken nuggets because it was just too different. He had no idea. It was not a good surprise. So, we did a lot of, wow, I see that is super shocking to you. And it made us feel really upset and sad. So, maybe we need to kind of back away from that food today, and we'll come back to it tomorrow, and we'll try again, and we'll learn about it again, and we'll see what's going on with that food. So a good way to get that from happening is to really start changing up that. Instead of giving a whole chicken nugget every single day, we give it cut up into small pieces. We get it, cut up with a food cutter, all different kinds of things. And then of course, buying a different variation of the food. So different flavors of chips or crackers, whatever they're eating. Or a different brand of chicken nuggets, a different brand of cheese, a different kind of eggs. So you'd be surprised, or maybe not, with the people that we have on here. Maybe you're not surprised if your child only eats one flavor of things, but you'd be totally surprised that they can tell the difference between each brand of different things. So that will be how we prevent those food jags from happening and make it so that foods are not so scary for our kiddos.
Piggybacking off of that, food chaining is another way that we can actually manage food jags, and it's also another strategy in itself. So with food chaining, our goal is to create chains or links between the foods that our kids already like to eat and then foods that are slightly different. And what this does is it allows us to naturally grow the food repertoire, which is exactly what we want, right? If we have those problem feeders, or even our picky eaters that are not eating as many foods as we would like them to. So this approach, we love it because it's very child friendly, it's very slow, and it's very natural. It's easy to tailor it to the specific child's needs or the things that they like to eat. You'll see in this picture here, we go from, this looks like bow tie noodles, and we're adding a little bit of color. So we're adding we're increasing all the way up to getting some vegetables in there, which is great for our kids that truly aren't getting any vegetables or fruits at all whatsoever. The thing that I love about food chaining is that not only are we looking at where we're coming from and where we're getting to, we're also adding all of these great foods in the middle. So these foods are, or this process is very great for children who are very visual. So these are our kids that are constantly, studying their food. These are the kids that are able to identify one speckle of pepper. I definitely have a few of those kiddos. If you can relate, I see you there. Our kids that are very rigid with specific brands or flavors of preferred foods. So going back to my case study that I talked about in the beginning, my kiddo who only ate blueberry Activia yogurt. This was a huge thing because Activia actually at one point discontinued their blueberry Activia yogurt, and this was traumatic for this family. And I'm not saying that to be funny by any means. This was truly traumatic for them because this was the closest thing to fruit that this child had in his diet. That yogurt had tiny little mashed up pieces of blueberry. I'm not sure if it was artificial or if it was truly real blueberry. But this was the only thing that this kiddo ate that was not tan or beige or orange in that kind of color realm. And that had a little bit of nutrition. The Activia yogurt also was very helpful for his digestive system. So when they weren't able to find that yogurt in the stores, he was really struggling with some constipation issues. If you've experienced constipation before, you'll know that that turns your appetite off even more. You don't want to eat when you feel that way. It doesn't feel good to your tummy. So this was very, very stressful for this family. We actually had people writing letters for this family to Activia, please bring this yogurt back. We had so many team members that were, on this kiddo's side trying to find as many blueberry Activia yogurts as they could at all the different local stores. So big deal for lots of families. And then also good for children who have limited play skills because food play is another big thing that we use with food therapy, and you will see that coming as well. So to get into this food chaining a little bit more, I'm actually going to give you an example that I used with this kiddo. So we went from his preferred goldfish and we went to an Annie's cheddar bunny. So a very natural, similar size, similar shape. It's an animal, but a very different animal. This took us a couple of weeks to get, to be able to feel comfortable enough to try this different orange cheese flavored cracker. From there, we were able to tolerate a Cheez-It. So we went to a square shape. So this was a really big deal. And then from there, we kept the shape the same and we changed the color. So we are now at a white cheddar Cheez-It. From there, food chaining is a great way to kind of find out what's out there because we as therapists, when we use food chaining, we're constantly, we're Google searching some weird things like small, round, orange with no speckles. We're constantly in Google looking for different things. I had not known this before, but they make miniature saltine crackers. So that's what we went to next. So it was the exact same size as a Cheez-It and similar in color to the white cheddar Cheez-It. And so that was where we went next. From there, we were able to increase the size and we went to a regular saltine cracker. So we kept that flavor the same and the color the same, but we just increased the size. From there, we went to a small square of lightly toasted bread and we made it the same exact size as that saltine cracker, very similar color, but very different texture. From there, we were able to go to a larger square of lightly toasted bread. So for this friend, his family really wanted him to be able to tolerate toasted bread. That was a really important thing for them. From here, we were actually able to go to toasted bread with the crust on, which was awesome. That was a really big deal for us. That was a huge success. And what we can work on towards, coming from this place where we're eating toasted bread, we can add, we're actually currently working on a very thin layer of butter on top of that. And then we could go to a very thin layer of peanut butter. We could go to some other type of spread. Maybe if we're going to work towards a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we're doing that peanut butter, a very thin layer to start. Maybe if we want to work towards something like a turkey and cheese sandwich, maybe we're going to do a very thin layer of mayonnaise or maybe a very thin layer of mustard. Trying to find what works for the family and what our goals are and what we're trying to add. But then in the process, you're also adding at least 5 different foods. So when we look at this as therapists, we're not just seeing that we went from eating goldfish to eating lightly toasted bread. We are also seeing that we added Annie's Cheddar Buddies, Cheez-Its, white cheddar cheese, it's saltine crackers, all of these other foods, which for a kiddo that only eats 8 foods to begin with, that's huge. We've now added so much variety. We've added a couple different colors. We've added some different textures. We've added some different flavor profiles. And from there, we can just keep expanding and expanding and expanding.
Okay, so getting back to talking a little bit more about family meals and modeling and how that's going to increase our child's overview of how feeding is going to go. So again, talking about eating together and how important meal times are as a social activity. So think about when we're eating at the table and we're able to talk to each other, we're watching what the other one is doing, we're watching how our parents are using our utensils, we're playing with our food, which I know we've all been told, don't play with your food. That's like the number one thing that I think I say to parents when they come in is let's try and drop that because we do want to play with our food. And here's the reason why we want to play with our food. We want to play with our food because we all have our occupations. A child's number one occupation and the best way that they learn is through play. So if they're going to play with their food, they're going to learn about that food. They're going to get it on their hands. They're going to get it on their mouth. And it's hopefully, you know, with enough time going to get into the mouth and we're going to like it because we've learned enough about it. And that starts with parents modeling, family modeling, siblings modeling, and sitting at the meal time or sitting at the dinner table together. So we do a lot of asking parents to go back to a family style meal. So putting all of the food into plates and dishes around the table, and can we pass those around and have each person serve themselves? Can the child take as much as they want of each food? And then we bring out our learning plate. So something that we put in the middle of the table, and everybody talks about our new foods, we smell them, we taste them, but everybody learns about that food at their own comfort level. So we'll see, and I believe the next slide, it'll tell us about the steps to eating. Thank you, Liz. So there are 32 steps to eating. What Liz was saying earlier, this is one of the biggest things in our lives that we use every single sensory system. So much is going on. So we might have a kiddo sitting at our dinner table with us, and they might only tolerate the food being on the table. They might not be able to put that on their plate. They might have just too much of a reaction. So they're at the very bottom of our steps to eating. And in order to get up, climb up this ladder to eating, we need to go through all of these steps and make sure that our kids can get through all of that while still feeling comfortable, feeling safe, feeling happy, not lacking trust with us. So this is a long way up if we're starting at the bottom, but say we've got someone that will do a tongue lick. So we're all the way up at taste. We don't have as many steps to go, but we still take it slow. We still take it. We meet our kid where they're at. That is one of our biggest things. And I keep saying that about a lot of things. We do have a lot of big things that come with feeding. But I think, to really, hit home, we need to meet our kids where they're at. We need to make sure that they're feeling safe, they're feeling comfortable, they're happy. It's a positive, fun experience. That's what's going to get us all the way up this ladder to eating.
So that brings us to food play, and Melissa kind of introduced this topic a little bit. So we talked earlier about our occupation. So these are the things that we do every single day as people. As a child, your main occupation is to play. Believe it or not, we learn through play as children. Food play allows us to learn about foods in a safe way. It allows us to create positive experiences. Every time I have a parent that is hesitant to play with their child with the food, I say to them, think about what this kid is going to remember. Think about what your child is remembering. instead of broccoli being really scary, something that sits on my table at dinner and my dad says, just take a bite, come on, just take a bite. Instead of that being our experience with broccoli, we can reframe our experience with broccoli to be, oh my gosh, last week my mom did the funniest thing. Broccoli was a tree and we had goldfish, and these goldfish were silly. They were climbing up the tree. Then we had an applesauce rainstorm, and that was so hilarious when my mom did that. When my mom played with me like that, you have now created this amazing connection with your child. You have allowed that child to feel safe and happy. You've created a positive experience. You're a lot of times using familiar foods and preferred foods in combination with other foods that might be new or might be anxiety provoking. And it's all about creating that positive experience and really focusing on that relationship component. So think about this as we kind of go through these different ideas. So our food play needs to occur either at the level that kiddo is at with the food, or maybe just a couple half steps above. So what we mean by that, all kids are going to be at different steps with different foods, right? We're not going to only tolerate every single food. So there are foods that we eat. There might be foods that we're willing to just lick. There might be foods that we're okay smelling. There might be some foods that we're all right with having on our plate. And then there might be those foods that when you enter the kitchen with that food, I am up and I am running from my table. So we have to be really aware of where that child is at as their baseline, and then where we're going. So if they're at that tolerate level, maybe we're doing things like playing peekaboo. Maybe we're putting foods in a container so that we don't smell it and we're not touching it, but we're able to see it and we're interacting with it in some way. Maybe we're going to slide things across the table. Maybe we're going to make things rain into different bowls. We have lots of aluminum bowls and plastic bowls and different kinds of modalities that we can use to make food fun. So maybe rice is scary, but rice sounds cool. Rice sounds like rain. Maybe that's part of our applesauce rainstorm. We're just thinking of ways that we can get the kiddos to buy in, have some fun, experience things in a new, somewhat fun way for them. Interacting with, maybe we're passing that container back and forth. Maybe we're using things like Melissa gave the example earlier of cookie cutters. We love cookie cutters. If there is one thing that you add to your Amazon cart, make it cookie cutters. We love our cookie cutters. You can use them for everything. They're also really great for promoting those fine motor skills. Maybe we're using food choppers. There's a lot of good kid-friendly knives now that have made their way to the market so that they're safe. They don't cut skin, but they cut food. So maybe we're cutting things up, like this little guy here is cutting something up independently. Maybe we're using a preferred food like a veggie straw or something of that nature to paint pictures, or maybe we're learning our name and we're writing our letters of our name in applesauce or yogurt or something like that. So we can use what we have and build upon that and have all of that fun with the new foods. So from there, once we're past interacting with, go through here a little bit. So then we're going to smell. So maybe we have that container with that food inside and we're just doing a quick little peekaboo. We got a little tiny bit of that smell. Maybe we're going to try to blow on that food across the table. Oh, let's have a race with our goldfish. You're going to put your goldfish here and I'm going to put my goldfish here, and let's go down and blow and see who can blow theirs across the table the fastest. When we get close to that food, we're naturally getting some smell. Having kids participate in activities like this is so much easier and more fun for them to do things rather than if we just said, okay, now smell it, just smell it, come on, smell it, right? That's not fun. So we want to make it fun for them. We want to make it natural. When we get to the touch level, we have lots of kids, lots of friends that like to squish things, smash things, break things, especially our little boys. We love to be destructive, right? So we're just smashing everything. We're making a big mess all over the place. That's okay. We're learning. That mess is a good thing. Maybe we're drawing with our finger now instead of, we've gone from our veggie straw and we feel comfortable enough doing that. And now we're sticking our finger in that. That's a huge step. When now we've gone to actually touching our body with that food that was previously terrifying to us. Maybe we're making silly faces on a plate. This picture in the corner there, that's actually from a kiddo that I see at the clinic. She made that, and that was me. That's her perception of what I look like, which lovely. I love it. But all of those foods were things that she did not previously want to touch, but to make me was so motivating to her that she was able to touch every single one of those foods independently. When we talk about the touch level, we want to talk about it in, like we said, miniature steps, right? So we have our hands, then we can go up to our body. I had another friend who really loved to play hide and seek. So he would have me close my eyes, and then he would hide it somewhere, either put it in his sleeve or put it, behind his back, or put it in his pocket, somewhere on his body. And then when I opened my eyes, I had to try to guess where it was. And this was just the most hysterical thing for this friend. He loved doing that. Lots of our little girls like to, make necklaces and different types of jewelry and things like that. We can make silly faces. We can make, eyebrows are a good one. We can make beards and mustaches. We can always pair it to what the kid's interested in as well. That's another really important thing. A lot of times as therapists, and you'll see as parents too, if you participate in this, in these activities with your kids, you'll have all these great ideas, right? And then your kid's just like kind of staring at you. I didn't like that one. So we need to make sure that our play is tailored to our kid. So if we have a friend that loves vehicles, I had a friend that loved vehicles. This got very repetitive for me, right? So I was constantly, I had all these great ideas, but he was only interested in these vehicles. So we bought all of the vehicle cookie cutters, and we were making vehicles out of every single food. We were making real vehicles go through applesauce, and we were, doing lots of different scenes where our trains and our planes and all of our different vehicles could go through. So we were constantly using vehicles because that's what he was interested in. And that's okay. If that's what your child is interested in, use that and take it and see how you can take that up the steps. There's so many things that you can do to have fun with your kids and be centering it towards what is important to them and what is special to them.
Okay, so then once we get through all of those and we've kind of made it up that steps to eating ladder, then we get up to touching our lips and our mouth, and we get to taste and chew and swallow. So we can use those foods as lipstick or chapstick, give kisses to the food. I do that a ton. I do all different kinds of kisses, puppy kisses, kitty kisses, whatever, like Liz was saying, whatever they are interested in. Using those foods as a toothbrush to brush our teeth, using them as a hairbrush, so still getting them kind of towards the head, getting them closer to the mouth, putting makeup on, putting war paint on with them, lots of different things. So again, whatever your child is really interested in, we're going to play to that. And then we finally get to taste and chew and swallow. We can play hide and seek in our mouth, because sometimes we get it up to our mouth and we get it in the mouth, and then it's just like, okay, I really want to get it out, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed. So we always tell the kiddos, you know what, if it goes in our mouth and we're still not feeling comfortable, it can come right back out. So we want to make sure that we have kids that have that really good spit pattern, or can get it out really quickly with their tongue. That's our biggest, safest way to know that if I put something into my mouth, I can get it out really quickly if I'm not comfortable. And that needs to be made known at the beginning, so that, again, they're still feeling safe, still feeling comfortable with those foods, as well as with us. Doing animal tongue tastes. So a snake lick, a really quick lick with our tongue, or I will often use a cow lick. So we'll do a really big cow lick and get our whole tongue in there. We can paint our tongue. So you see our little girl up in the right-hand side over here with the blue tongue. So painting our tongue with applesauce, or using a food to, pretend paint something on our tongue. And then we get to chewing and swallowing. So we do a lot of, again, animal chewing. So big crunches, lots of big alligator bites, or a teeny tiny mouse bite. So something that we're still kind of learning about and we're not so sure about, we do a really tiny bite. And then who can crunch faster, who can crunch slower, who can get it out of their mouth faster, who can get it into their mouth faster. So we can take a ton of different ways to, work up that ladder and get through the food play with all of our senses. And I wanted to make a really quick note of, these things are not always super easy for us as adults. Like even us as therapists, I will still rack my brain of what are some of the different ways that I can play with food? And I've done so many, and this kid has done all of these and they're getting kind of bored with it. Go online. Go look for things that are doing or that will work for you. I do a lot of playing up to the holidays. We just had St. Patrick's Day. So I actually found it was like a painting page that was for dotting. So using it for little kids that were working on dotting with a Q-tip. So I had that and I was working on it with other kids for those fine motor skills. But then I thought in my head, can I use this for my feeding therapy? And then I went to our kitchen at our facility and we have all of these different pudding colors. And I thought, maybe I can do this with my feeding kiddos. And they loved it. So I had some kids that were able to touch that pudding and dot it on our rainbow. And we got to try, red colored pudding and green and orange and yellow, and 90% of the kids that I had, it was so motivating for them because it was pudding and it was sweet and it was colorful and we were making a rainbow, and then we got some marshmallows out and put it on the clouds. So some kids were able to use their fingers, some kids were able to use Q-tips, some kids were able to use straws, and then we were drinking the pudding through the straws. So it's just, if we're not really thinking about things, if we're not so sure, we're not so confident in our own play skills anymore, go online. There's so much on there. Pull up some things and be like, you know what, we're going to use this paper and we're going to paint on it with whatever we have in the house. And also talking about all of these things and all of the different things that we've talked about and the things that we can do, especially with the food play. It's not something that has to be done for long periods of time, every single minute of every single day. We often say, you know what, if we're going to play with our food, like, yes, we want to do it at the dinner table and we want to be comfortable and safe and playful with our food there while we're having our meals. But we can also do this stuff outside of mealtime. So 10 to 15 minutes once a day, every couple of days, just something like what we would do. So going back to that exercise analogy of, if we exercise one time for 30 minutes every other week, are we going to really see a ton of results? Probably not. So if we're doing it for a short amount of time every day or every couple of days, if we can just kind of add it into our routine somewhere, even if we only make it like one food that we're like, oh, we're going to see how we can play with this today. Let's get that into their routine so that we're constantly learning about something. We're constantly playing with food, and we don't always have to bring it to our mouth. It's not always the end goal to get it in and swallow and chew and, oh, we got a new food every single time we do this. It's not going to necessarily happen like that. It's going to be, this very slow progression. When we play with kids with their own toys, we're not asking them to constantly do the exact same thing every single time with that play toy. So we're not going to constantly ask them, or we're not going to constantly expect them to, every single time we play with something, put it in our mouth and swallow it and, add a new food to their diet. But every single time that we play with something new, it's just increasing our experience. It's increasing that positivity and that safe feeling and that feeling of comfort around food that is going to build up over time. And that's how we're going to get our new foods added into our diet.
Exactly. Every single time you're doing food play, go back to your roadmap analogy. You are sending information through those pathways to the brain. And that is all great, positive learning. Not only are we connecting, we're developing relationships, we are making memories and having fun. We're also sending all of that information to the brain. We're learning and understanding what that food looks like and feels like. When our sensory properties have a better understanding of that, we are much less scared. We're much less anxious about those foods. The other thing that I wanted to know about food play, I see this a lot with parents. I'll often have my parents send me videos once I feel like they've mastered their food play and they understand. I'll say, okay, now go try this at home. Send me a video, send me a quick clip. Let me see you playing with your kid with your food. And what I'll often see is parents, they start out really strong and they're doing all of these great things and they're having so much fun and they're building, memories and all of this. And then the parent takes a big leap. they went from, you know, touching, and then they go straight to the lips. And then all of a sudden you can see the kid's face like shut down, completely shut down. So we want to make sure we're keeping in mind those steps to eating. We have that available to you on the documents that were uploaded. So take that with you. If you need to print it out and stick it on your refrigerator as a reminder, make sure that we are not shocking our kids with something that's too much. And the other thing is making sure that we are being encouraging and happy and having fun through everything. So if we get to a point where we aren't able to do something or we aren't able to touch something, that's okay. We're not going, aw. We are making sure that we're being encouraging. We're still having fun. Oh, if we can't touch it with our fingers, how about we go grab some veggie straws, or how about we go grab pretzel rods and let's push it. We're seeing in what other ways we're teaching our kids, we can accommodate you. Let's think of something else that we can do that's going to work, that's going to help you learn.
All right, so then lastly, we're going to talk about food science. So this is something that we do with some of our older kids. So some of you may be here and thinking, I have a 15-year-old that if I try to play with them and put food on my tongue, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. So we also have food science that we can talk about. And I will say, disclaimer here, I use food science from a very young age all the way up through, even coupled with play. So we're constantly kind of looking at our food and figuring out what the color is and learning about it. So I'm using this with a lot of my kids, but this is something that is geared more towards our older kiddos and something we can use for those kids that are just kind of past that play point or they're not there yet. So I know we had someone that was asking a question that's a little bit older, an autistic adult. And so this is going to be kind of geared towards you. So this is kind of what we would recommend for someone that's older, something that I would probably do for myself when I'm trying to learn about a new food. So we look at it first. So we go through all of our 5 senses, and a really good way that I help parents to remember this is we start at the top of our head and we just kind of move down. So we start with our eyes. What does it look like? What shape is it? What color is it? And then what are we using to move down? We're using our hands. What does it feel like? So is it wet? Is it dry? Is it cold? Is it warm? Is it bumpy? Is it smooth? So learning about all the properties of that food with our hands. What does it smell like? Is that smell small, medium, or large? Does it have a really tiny smell, or is it this really big smell that's making us really react? Does it smell sweet? Does it smell kind of bitter? Does it smell bready, spicy? We talk about the taste. Is the taste, again, small, medium, or large? Are we getting a really big taste? Is it sweet? Is it sour? Is it spicy? Is it salty? Does it have a taste that's kind of alerting to us that, oh, that's a really big one. That was something that I still kind of need to keep learning about. And then what does it sound like? So when it's in our mouth, or even when it's outside of our mouth, we can break it. Does it sound like it's hard? Does it sound crunchy in our mouth? So that type of stuff. So again, when we're going through all of these, we're gonna have the same thing in the back of our mind as with play. And it's going to be, if we can only get through looking at it today, if we can't get to touching it, if it's just too scary, then we only look at it. And maybe mom says, or maybe dad says, or maybe sibling says, hey, I'm gonna feel this and I'm gonna let you know what it feels like. And that sometimes will help to decrease the kiddos, anxiety around this food. So they don't necessarily have to do it themselves, but maybe somebody else will do it for them, and they'll say, well, I feel that it is cold and I'm smelling it and it smells, it's kind of a big smell to me. So we're not asking our kiddo to go above where they're at. We're not, like Liz was saying, we're not shocking them and saying, okay, now bring it to your nose. We're saying, if you're not able to do that right now and it's just still too scary, I'll help you out. I'll tell you what I feel. And then maybe we can learn about something else. Or maybe next time we try this, maybe we'll learn about something even more about this food. So, and then we can attempt to make those connections between those foods as well. And this is a really good one if we can't get through everything. what else is orange that we ate today? So we're trying to eat this goldfish cracker, but it's just too hard. What else is orange that we had today? Oh, we had that Cheez-It earlier in the morning. That's orange too. We also had another orange food. Or did we also have something that was salty today? Oh yeah, for breakfast we had, that cracker that was kind of salty. Okay, we already had a salty food today. So we can start making those connections of this is how food is the same. And then we can also make connections of this is how food is different from the other food. This is what's making it kind of scary. Oh, thank you for telling me that. Maybe we can fix it. Maybe we can, instead of it being the size that it is, maybe we need to make it a really small size so that we can learn about it, because maybe it's just too big. So we can work on kind of fixing those foods too. We can change the color of the food. We can make it smaller. We can add salt. We can add sugar. We can add chocolate chips to our pancakes, because that makes it so much more fun and so much more enjoyable. And now we've fixed that food to the point to where we can actually eat it. So just kind of keeping those things in the back of our mind as well.
We also do have a food science tracking sheet that you can use with your kiddos that they can go through and they can fill out each step themselves. I have a lot of friends that love to go through and kind of write everything down and have all the information out there. The other thing that I think is important to note about food science is that we all kind of do this, right? How many times do you hear from someone, oh, you got to try this new, protein shake that's on the market? What are you going to ask them? You're going to ask them, what does it taste like? And they might tell you, oh, it tastes like a milkshake. It's so good. You got to have it. Or it tastes like an Andes mint. So good. You got to have it. So you're naturally always relating things to things that you've already had or things that you already understand. You're talking about these things naturally already. So this is a really seamless, natural process to use with your older kids.
Okay, so when to talk to your doctor about feeding. So if your child is rapidly losing foods that they used to eat, if meal times are so incredibly stressful for both you, your child, siblings, oftentimes feeding difficulties are going to change the entire family dynamic. So when that's happening, we want you to go to your pediatrician and talk with them about what's going on. If none of the strategies that you are working with or that you've tried have been helping at all.
And then also if your child has such a limited food selection that it's impacting their nutrition or their health or their weight, obviously that's a big important thing that we need to be aware of and we need to make sure that we're acting on. In these instances, often seeing an occupational therapist that can help you, that can also connect with a nutritionist and the pediatrician is really helpful. We can all work as a team to make sure we're getting enough calories while we work on foods. Feeding can be a very slow process. So we do need to make sure that our kids are getting adequate nutrition while they're also working on gaining foods. If you are constantly worried about your child's food intake, this is a big, we hear this from parents all the time, like every single day is stressful, every single day. That's a big indicator. And then those problem feeders and picky eaters, if your child eats less than 20 to 30 foods, no or limited fruits or vegetables or proteins. So if they're missing out on big, huge categories of food, we know that, again, that's going to go back up to the top. That's going to be impacting their health and nutrition. So that would be another time to talk to your pediatrician. And then now we are just going to open it up to questions.
So there were a few questions in the chat. So Kathleen and I will go through the ones that we've seen. And one of the questions that came up was, how can you food chain when the child eats very little different foods? So I'm guessing their inventory is very limited, and how could you food chain in that instance?
Okay, so I would love to have an example for this one. Like what kinds of foods are we talking here? Do we have some ideas or suggestions, some examples of foods that we're trying to chain?
Stephanie, I think you're the one that asked the question. If you want to maybe in the chat put in some of the foods that your child is eating, and then I'll be happy to share it with the speakers. And then let me see if there was another question while she's typing as well. There was a question, it was later or earlier in the chat, excuse me, but it was, how can some of these approaches be utilized with an ABA feeding therapist and using them in an ABA environment?
So ABA feeding therapy, our ABA feeding programs tend to be a lot different than what we as OTs will be doing. So the way that I've worked with our ABA program that we have at Building Bridges is that I will often talk with the child's BCBA, and we will just do the same type of thing. So when they're doing their ABA sessions, and I'll talk with their DLTs, and we'll do some really good training with their BCBA and their DLTs on how to play with food or how to go through the food science program. And we'll actually add that into their sessions for ABA. So we're making sure that, you know, they're really knowledgeable then about how to play with the food and how we're not taking those steps too far. So basically the same type of education that we're giving to you guys today, we'll give to their ABA therapists, and then we'll have them kind of carry out just those play sessions. So just how we said, you know, oh, you can do this 10 to 15 minutes once a day or every couple of days. We would just add that into their ABA program. And then we would just have their ABA coming back to us, or their BCBA coming back to us and saying, here's what's going on. Here's, you know, the foods that we had. Here's what, you know, we did. Here's what we saw. And then how do we need to change anything up? So that's our biggest way that we do that, is just education and being able to help them to know how to do the playtime with the foods, or how to do the food science with those foods.
The other thing that's important to note when we talk about ABA and feeding therapy is we do not use reinforcers in feeding therapy. So this is just something that the research shows that when we offer reinforcers for, you know, licking the apple or whatever it may be, we are kind of making the association in the brain that apple is bad. So if I do this bad thing or this difficult thing, then I get something better. We also don't want to use food as reward. So we don't want to hear, you know, if you eat your peas, then you get dessert, or if you eat this, then you can have more pizza. We want all foods to be on a level playing field. We don't want some foods to be highly motivating and great, and then other foods to be bad. We want to think of all foods as good and acceptable and fun and safe. So we always want to recommend not using any reinforcers, and definitely no punishments when it comes to food.
So I'm seeing a couple other questions that are just coming in now. How can I help my 4-year-old with eating with forks and spoons? She's having a hard time. So we would want to take a look at why she's having a hard time with eating or with using those utensils. So is it a fine motor concern? Is it a coordination concern? That to me says that we might be looking into, let's get an evaluation with an occupational therapist. So talking to the pediatrician, getting a script for an occupational therapy evaluation so that we can see what's actually going on. And I mean, it definitely could just be that she's just super afraid of the foods and doesn't want to use them, or that she's tactily defensive, doesn't want to be near the foods, doesn't want to be touching the foods. I think that's something that I would want to look further into with an evaluation if we're having that hard of a time. But again, going back to what I was saying about the tactile bins, so using that with something, you know, that doesn't even have to be food. So using beads or something that she really, really loves to work on scooping with a spoon and practicing, you know, not spilling off of the spoon, or something like using Play-Doh to work on stabbing with a fork that doesn't necessarily have to be food. And then we start working on food after that as well.
Awesome. We had another question earlier in the chat, and I think I'm going to take 2 of them and kind of merge it together into one question. Can you guys kind of talk about generalizing these skills for maybe working with your OT, working with your therapist, doing this at home, and kids who maybe, you know, are eating lunch in their school cafeteria or eating somewhere other than where they are learning these new skills?
So the first thing that we hear this all the time from parents, I don't have time. I don't have time to play. I don't have time to, do all of these great things that you're recommending. I'm struggling to get my kid to just eat their food and, get out the door because we have 3 different, sports that my family does. So that's okay. So when it comes to meal times and snack times, allow those to be kind of what the child, they will eat. So that you're knowing that they're getting their nutrition every single day for all of their snacks and meals. But then make sure that you're setting aside time in your day, even if it's an odd time, even if it's late at night or early in the morning, or, not during a specific meal or snack time where you can use these strategies. So you do want to be doing your food play or your food science or whatever strategies that you're using. And a lot of times you will combine those strategies together, making sure that you're doing that at home. And then also making sure that you're doing that across multiple feeding partners. So we don't just want to see mom as the person that plays with food. We want everyone to be doing the same things. A lot of our kids have siblings that love to participate in this. So having, sessions together with siblings are great. Siblings can also be awesome role models. Especially if they don't have, any feeding difficulties, then a lot of times those people can be models for your kids that do struggle with feeding.
Definitely. I see a couple more questions about, should we do sensory prep immediately before the meal or sometime during the day? Trying to think of balancing this with meal prep. Yeah, definitely. Right before the meal would be great. During the day, honestly, sensory experiences, sensory exercises, just ways to get, or activities to get sensory in, can definitely be done throughout the day. It helps everybody's sensory systems, as long as we're not seeing that increase in anxiety or kind of silliness and things like that going on. But yeah, I will often tell my parents to do it 10 to 15 minutes right before the meal. And then we're kind of sitting down afterwards because we're definitely ready to eat. At that point, after we've done some really good heavy work or vestibular activities, so then they're, even more ready to sit down for that meal.
And I'll just go ahead and reiterate something that's kind of been touched on in the chat. If any of you viewers are interested in a similar service, and maybe you don't live in the zone of building bridges necessarily, if you need any additional information about this therapy or other therapies, please call our navigator line. It is the 877 number on our website. We are more than happy to help connect you with the therapies that you're seeking for your child in this regard, as well as other things. But definitely take down the building bridges information that you see on this slide here. If you live in their service area, you can definitely inquire and ask additional treatment questions specific to your child that way as well.
Yeah. And also building bridges, we also have an intensive feeding program as well that lasts for 3 weeks, and it happens for 4 days a week. So the child comes for 4 days per week, and they see 2 therapists actually. And they'll see those same therapists throughout the 3 weeks, so that they're getting a little bit of difference with therapists, again, not sticking to just one person like Liz was saying. And what we would do for that is we would have you come in for an evaluation first if the kiddo is not already on the schedule, and then we would work that out after there. We can always take more kids into our intensive feeding program. It tends to, we have a really, really great results with that as well.
Going back to the food chaining question as well, if there were no suggestions for foods that were coming into the chat box, my kind of generic response would be, you can truly do food chaining with anything, and you might have to modify foods to get them to be able to be chained. So for example, if I'm trying to chain something that's large, maybe I have a large orange food, and I'm trying to chain it with something that's a small orange food, maybe I'm going to make that large, square food into a tiny little circle. So maybe I'm buying tiny little cookie cutters that are little circles, or using a knife to cut little circles. Now my food chain lines up because we're doing the same size and the same color. So think of ways that you can definitely modify the foods that you're trying to link, so that it works better. You don't have to feel like you have to pick foods that are already naturally exactly the same. But definitely keep in mind that you might have to add some half steps in there. So maybe when you're going from your big square of orange cheese, maybe you need to do a small square of orange cheese. The child might need to tolerate that first, then you can change the shape to a circle. So you might have to add more steps in there, but it can definitely, you can make anything work really. There is a great book on food chaining that is available on Amazon. I can find the link and put it in the chat box if anyone is interested in that.
Definitely.
Okay, and then the last one I think I want us to touch on, if you guys have any expertise in this realm, we've had some questions about adults who maybe experience these feeding troubles as children, kind of how can they transition to continue to work on this, beyond the age of 21? And do you have any recommendations for maybe additional reading material and in your expertise where they should go to start with this information?
Yeah, definitely. I saw in the question that you had done PTSD therapy, and I think that would be one of the first things that I would recommend to is to really get in and start working on just, anxiety and fear as a whole. I think that is something that is not talked about as much. We tend to want to just go in and start working on the feeding therapy, and we do need to work on those underlying issues first. So, it spans over a lot of different things when we've got this fear, and it doesn't, always just go to feeding. I think food science is a great thing to do. I think looking at your foods that you're comfortable with right now, your safe foods, and learning more about those, learning more about the textures and the smell and the taste, and really kind of delving into that. And then going to the grocery store if you're able to, and then trying to look for foods that look very similar, just like Liz was doing with her food chaining. So kind of food chaining for yourself. So, finding something that looks very similar, that you're, not feeling super, stressed about, that you're like, maybe I could, just learn about this, and being okay with throwing it away if you're not comfortable with it. So learning about that food and knowing that you're not going to push yourself any farther than you want to go. And just really changing that relationship with food. And that takes a long time. So give yourself grace, give yourself time, be positive with yourself. And I think that's the best thing to do, is really break down that relationship with food and learn what you're most comfortable with, and then go towards those foods. It doesn't need to be that you have this, huge range of foods and this, crazy well-rounded diet. That's kind of overrated. You go with the foods that you feel safe with, that you're comfortable with, and we kind of just expand on those. And as many as we can add, that's awesome. But I will say, just give yourself grace. I think that's the biggest thing.
Eating is often a lifelong thing, right? So we don't always, I feel like we get this question from parents all the time. How long are they going to be in feeding therapy? How long is my kid going to struggle with this? And a lot of parents have a hard time coping with the fact that this isn't always a quick fix, and most of the time it isn't. So definitely giving yourself grace if you are the person who is struggling with feeding and eating, and giving your children grace too, because it might, something that seems small to one person is huge to another. So just remembering that and trying to expand upon things as you grow.
Melissa and Liz, I wanted to thank you for your time. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Everyone, they have tons of information on our website that they gave that you can access along with their information. If there's more specific questions, reach out to them, reach out to the navigators, and we'll see you in the next breakout in about 10 more minutes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, everyone.